So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work I do with my principal students to get them exposed to data early on in their academic career. So before I get into it, I had 3 challenges that I constantly kept encountering with our students. So our first challenge for me that I had to overcome was I teach principles of macroeconomics mainly to an audience that doesn't want to go on and do economics. I'm in a business school, so 90% of our students are only in that class because we require them to take that class. So it's a really hard setting to walk into when you know the only reason they're there is because they're forced to be there. So the challenge for me was, could I give them something that they could use later on, right? Because we saw in all of our assessment exams of our business students that no matter what we did in the principles class, they didn't really remember a lot of that material 1, 2, 3 years down the road. So I wanted to think of something else I could do to help them later on when they aren't in economics. Second challenge, when I was teaching intermediate macro, I used to give a really basic assignment to my students. Go out, find data on a country, and present it. More detail than that on the assignment, but basically I had them go out to World Bank or some of the international data sources to find data and make presentations. They couldn't create basic graphs. These were mostly econ students that had just not been exposed to those tools throughout their career. And the third challenge was more at the school level. We kept hearing from our accreditors that we needed to include more data in the classroom. We needed to include data analytics throughout our curriculum. So what could I do at a principal's level to sort of fulfill or solve these 3 challenges I faced? So I pushed a lot into data. And so for me, it was getting students engaged early on with data. So student experience. Going back to one of my challenges, this is what I saw first. So I would do this basic assignment, intermediate macro, and students would present the graphs. And these were some of the graphs I was getting. These were juniors and seniors, economic majors, presenting these graphs. They were going out to the career, they were going out to jobs, and they couldn't do basic graph functions. This was apparently an okay graph for them, right? All sorts of problems, right? The ones I struggle with more than anything are pie charts. I don't know what 42% of government debt is, let alone what the other 58% are. I'm sure I'm not alone in the pie chart problems. Students love them, they just don't know how to use them. So I struggled with pie charts. And then I struggled with scales. These were juniors and seniors graduating from, I think, a pretty good school that couldn't do basic graphs. And I could go on with hundreds of these examples. So we needed to do something at a principles level. Yeah, scale, definitely a problem on that one. So I wanted to give students an opportunity to do something. Right? I wanted them to be able to do economics, but I wanted them to give them a tool that they could use later on in their career, whether they're in economics, whether they go on into finance, accounting, marketing, management, whatever that is. Right? We know data is becoming increasingly important for them. So I created something different. Right? I wanted them, for me it was something different. I needed to engage more with data in the class. It wasn't just the standard lecture. I needed to expose them to data if I was going to expect them to be exposed to data as well. So for me, what I ended up doing, right, a couple objectives, right? Use principles to teach data literacy. And these are 18, 19-year-olds that I was doing this for. And I wanted to expose them and help them find data, understand data, interpret it, visualize it, and analyze it. That's a lot. It's a lot to do. And so it required a lot of adjustments for me in my teaching, right? And most of that was using data in class. So 3 websites that I use pretty regularly in this, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. I'll walk through what each of them can do here in a second. But I use Fred. Without the existence of Fred, the ability to get students to use and analyze data would be virtually impossible. The people at the St. Louis Fed have done a great job of compiling data. For visualization, if you haven't seen the Our World in Data from Max Rosser, it's a wonderful website. I'll show you some examples there. And then the last one, Gapminder, with Hans Rosling when he created that. I suspect some of you have seen some of these websites. I'll walk you through what they can do here in a second. So those were the 3 that I needed to become familiar with. Fred, really easy. So some example graphs I had students do, just go in and look at duration of unemployment. So they could go in and see what's going on. They could interact with the data. And a lot of times what I would do in class is the last 10 to 15 minutes of the class period, I would walk them through it. And then I would give them the assignments to take home and do. So I wasn't sending them out, here, go create this, do this. It was me spending the time with them, walking them through those sources, right? And one of the things that I always liked with the Fred is they had all sorts of data. So whether you wanted to do it macro or micro, up in Washington State, trade is a big topic for us. So this graph just looks at the relative value of your exports to China for all out of all of your exports. And so Washington State is very dependent on trade with China. So it allows us also to introduce some current events throughout the classroom. So the Fred website was great for a lot of data work for the students. The Our World in Data, it's fun to be able to interact with them, and you can see the sources they're using. So they pull a lot of their data from the Madison Project, which goes back to 1800 in a lot of cases. What's nice with this is you can work with it with the students, so they can come in. If they want to look at other countries, we can add them in, just grab a few that make sense. Well, not really, but. And then you can go in and regraph it for them. So it also gives you the ability to be current in everything in your data and your presentation, allows the students to play around with it. But if you go to their website, they have little modules. If you're doing economic growth, it's probably a pretty good website. Another example, primary school enrollment data. Again, you can just get in and play around with the data. That was my goal, right? If I'm showing these visuals in class, it's going to make the students more curious. It's going to make them want to learn more about the material, is what I'm slowly finding out. But it's also going to help them better enhance their skills at creating their graphs. Gapminder, I think most people have seen Gapminder. It uses a lot of data from the World Bank, but again, it's a visualization tool. So you can go in, if you want to play it, we can go in and play this data and watch how life expectancy income have changed over the last 215 years. I suspect most people, I hope most people have seen Hans's YouTube video on this. It's a wonderful video, but you can also incorporate to students. It allows students to visualize, again, in this case, economic growth. So walk through it, play around with it, and then there's tons of variables all the way throughout you can pick. Now, what I did, right, so that was what I started using more of those tools in the classroom. I started using more Fred, I used Our World in Data, and I used Gapminder to get the students excited for data. I would use a lot of this time, last 15, 20 minutes of class, to introduce a concept, introduce something, to let them go in and do the data. So that way, if any questions came up, I wasn't bombarded in office hours. They would work with each other, they would find the data together, and then they would go out and answer questions. So it minimized some of that stress students have of, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing, how do I find this? It allowed them to have easy access to me and work with other people. Right? And again, the program I spent most time with them on was Fred, just because of the number of data sources that they incorporated. And then the final assignment that I would have students do was create an infographic. I wanted students to have something they could take away from the course, right? I wanted them to have something that they could basically be proud of, other than hanging an exam grade up on their fridge, right? So infographics, if you haven't seen them, are a great way to practice data, right? Present data. Now the beauty of this is I've never created an infographic in my life, but I have my students do it, and they love it. There's enough tutorials online to send them out to. There's enough free sources out there for them to do this. And I'll show you some of these examples of these infographics here in a second. But you can see I'm actually using one of the programs, Visme, for these slides right now. But there's 6, 7, 8 different platforms that are all free that allow you to import data, graph data, present data, create these infographics. So the infographics I'm going to show you are all done by my principal students. They were all done after we did some in-class exercises where you can go through And they're all active, they're live, you can scan over the data, and all of a sudden you get significantly better figures. You saw that they were engaged with the material, they liked doing it. It was something different for them. It wasn't just answering short answer problems. They were able to do some creativity, they were able to put the infographics together, and they really liked it. Now, some get carried away with clip art, right? They still have that struggle, and I tell them keep clip art to a minimum, right? Because they just go, you guys have all seen the PowerPoint presentations where they just, whatever they can enter, they do. Some do that, some don't. Venngage was one of the more popular ones students used. You can see all the data is live and active. So for them, they can print it out, they can use it as a poster, whatever they wanted to do with it. But at the end of the day, they all had something, if it was done well, that they could show. Right? They had something to take out of the class. So whether they went on to do economics, at least then they're going to have exposure to data. Right? If they went and did something else. I've had students come back to me, and they still do infographics for other classes. They were still using the same software that they learned in principles in their finance or management courses. Pictochart, another one, again, just lets you play around with the data. And for a lot of them, it's just a fun way for them to actually also learn about something else, learn about another country. We spend so much time on the US, I force them to do something outside the US. So you can see this one's Germany, right? This one, close on the clip art, but still pretty good, pretty clean overall. They did Asia, right? This is Visme, again, just more examples for them. Right? I'm not trying to constrain them in what they want to do. They could have picked any country they wanted. Greece is probably the most popular. Every student loved looking at Greece, mostly just from the Great Recession. Few more examples. Infograms kind of cool because you can switch things on and off. And the students learned to do all this on their own. I didn't teach them, I didn't show them, they did it. And so this generation, I think, wants to have more assignments like this. Right? They knew the tools, they knew how to create the graphs, they knew what the graphs should look like, but they want to be able to do something more creative than just draw X's on pieces of paper. And that's what I think I found out most, is that they really liked and they got into it, and it was fun for them to do. Right? Last example here, Korea, again, just all sorts of different examples, but all these were done by freshmen and sophomores, right? Not junior, seniors, right? They had no prior econ background, but giving them access to the data, showing them where it's at, how to use it, how to create the graphs throughout the term, gave them the tools they needed to do this later on. I don't know what they're going to take out of econ 2-3 years down the road, but I suspect now they at least know some of these basic principles, I hope. Oops. So my conclusion is a quote I had from a student. I was walking across campus the other day, and it was big recruiting time. And the student goes, I just had an interview. And it was either with, I think it was with Boeing or Liberty Mutual, one of the companies in Seattle. I had a job interview, and they kept asking me to cite examples of when I use data. We hear this a lot from employers, right? Especially with economics students. Give me an example when you use data. And for a lot of our students, we didn't have a required econometrics course. So they didn't have a data course. And if you're in community colleges, it's also likely you don't have econometrics. You don't have a data course. So for the student, she was able to use this assignment as her example. And she did get, I think it was an internship, she did get the internship offer. But it gave them something that they could also talk about with employers. It allowed them to talk about a skill they developed that they otherwise wouldn't have. So for me, hopefully, the takeaway is it is time consuming on your end to build the assignments, to build your notes, to include these visualizations, to include these resources. But I think for most of the students now, they're not walking away with just a standard economics material that what we've heard is they don't remember it anyway, but they will remember some of these tools, some of these visualizations. I hope. That's my goal.